press. Let's talk a little Show Me Institute with Joe Miller, the policy analyst. Good morning, Joe Miller.
Good morning.
How'd you get to work today?
Well, I took the Metrolink down here.
Took the Metrolink. And then how'd you get from the Metrolink to here?
I walked. It's actually it's really close. The Richmond Heights station is like, I don't know, 2 blocks from here or something.
You walked the entire way?
The entire way.
You didn't Uber, cab, nothing? No one picked you up?
I was thinking of taking the Uber, but, just
Holy
didn't do
mackerel.
it.
The man took metro traffic, public transit, and walked here, and you were fine, right?
I survived.
Still have your
entire
wallet
trip.
and your keys and your faculties and
I
everything?
will have to say, this morning, there weren't a lot of people at the stops. I mean, a little bit of rain keeping people from their civic duty of taking public transportation.
All right, Joe Miller. Let's talk NGA, the mapping agency. What's the latest there?
Well, to outline things a little bit for your listeners, they are still in the works of choosing between multiple sites in the St. Louis area. I mean,
Right.
no matter what happens, this thing is not going to go away from the region. The jobs are still going to stay here.
Right.
That's going to be fine. Everyone can calm down about that.
Right.
But obviously, this is St. Louis, and we've had lots of problems with fractured political units, and
Right.
they like to keep their tax revenue, and they all have grand plans for what they would do with this site. So obviously, we're fighting between a site out mostly in the biggest 2 challengers are the one in St. Charles County, or no, St. Clair County
Right.
in Illinois, and obviously in St. Louis City on the north side,
Right.
just north of the Pruitt-Igoe site, but not containing the Pruitt-Igoe site.
Right.
And one of the things that broke last week that was really big is that in the budget, they have what looks to be the St. Clair site. And everyone says, oh, this is only a placeholder. Don't worry about it. Like, this is not something that's been decided.
Right.
However, what they said was, we chose to put it there because it was the cheapest possible amount of money for the largest amount of land. And I'm not going to claim to know anything about the budgeting process in the federal government.
Right.
However, they did say it's the cheapest for the largest portion of land. And if I were St. Louis City and I'm competing for the NGA, that's worrying me.
Yes. But we know that in government, they don't always do what's cheaper. You and I being businessmen, we have 2 widgets. We'd go with the cheaper one or the one that makes more sense, right? Where price point being an important part of the equation. But we know in government, both parties don't necessarily go with the cheaper option.
That's certainly true, and there's plenty of political considerations. And both in Illinois and in Missouri, in St. Louis City, there are all these pot sweeteners of, like, they're out there.
Right.
Transportation improvements both here and there. They're cleaning up the site both here and there. And there's things to be said for both of them. However, I do think one thing that I think my colleague John Wright brought up here last week, and I think it's incredibly important to point out that one of these sites, the one in St. Louis City, is actually going to kick 47 households out of an area and
Right.
basically wipe out a community.
Right.
And granted, it's not some place that's incredibly economically vibrant, but St. Louis City, decades of policy here have led to problems like this, or at least contributed to them.
Yeah.
And the idea that you have to destroy the neighborhood to save it is I think is an interesting prospect, especially when when you look at the other options, they don't involve kicking people forcibly off of their land.
Well, Donald Trump has no problem with eminent domain, so that's that's a whole other issue. All right, we'll wait and see. April 1st, I guess, is the big day. Let's talk about the zoo. The zoo announced that they are not going to pursue Grants Farm. Good, bad, indifferent? Do you care? What's going on there?
I think this is a very good move by the Zoo Museum District. Clearly, there's some disagreement going on in the Bush family about what to do with that site. However, I would also point out that when we're talking about buying Grants Farm, one of the Bushes had a plan to keep it private and to keep it running basically how we would imagine it, and maybe even add a brewery to that site. And that sounds great from the taxpayer perspective. If the zoo district takes over, they are almost completely funded by tax revenue.
Right.
They need tax revenue. Why exactly should the taxpayer be taking on another parcel of land through this district when a private entity is willing to give it to you for free?
Right.
That seems like a no-brainer to stick with that.
Well, but the zoo was sort of caught between a rock and a hard place. It was floated the idea. They said, look, we're going to go to the public. If they vote to increase their zoo museum tax, we will take it on. We'll only do it with the public support. And so then the zoo got kind of caught between the family's faction. And so finally they just said, look, we're going to wash our hands of this. We'll let the family figure it out.
I think that was a good decision. But when you come back to it, I mean, they were going to ask. They want to broaden the tax base anyway, so they can build gondolas over 6440 and build a luxury hotel. And now they apparently want more. They wanted more money to go after this, and only infighting kept them away from that.
Right.
I think a lot of people, when they look at the Zoo Museum District, it's time to start asking some questions about what they're doing, because I think most people think, we support those zoo with actually quite a bit of tax money. I mean, that's $70 million a year to the whole thing. That's
Right.
a lot of money.
Yes.
And, I think most people think we're keeping our institutions free. We're keeping them in great shape. We're keeping them competitive. And that's a good thing. But it almost looks like from the leadership of the Zoo Museum District that they're turning into the infotainment industrial complex of St. Louis. And I don't know if taxpayers are quite ready for that.
That's why, Joe Miller, you are a policy analyst at a think tank and not a politician, because do not mess with the people's free zoo. That's all I'm saying. Even though they're paying out the nose for it, they still think it's free.
Yeah, well,
so
free to someone.
it's free to somebody, but not to us. Joe Miller, Show Me Institute. Where can we read you? Where can we find you?
Well, you can read everything we've written about this at showmeinstitute.org.
All right. And your email, if someone wants to reach out to you?
Oh, I think I'll keep that private.
All right, fair enough. All right, get back on Metrolink and get out of here. Thanks, Joe. 8:43 here, Big 550 KT.